Roles and Boundaries. Now this video really is aimed at people involved in community participation, and what we mean by that is people who are involved with voluntary organisations. So you might be helping out the charity, you might be volunteering in some form, you might be involved in a tenants and residents association, anything like that. But a lot of the things I'm going to cover also apply to any working environment or any job, so you may find this interesting even if you're not a volunteer. But essentially what we're going to talk about today is what you can do in your role, what you can't do in your role, and how your role fits into a bigger picture. So let's get started. What do you contribute? It's important you understand how your work fits into the bigger picture. So there are two questions you really need to ask yourself. Firstly, what do you contribute to your organisation? And secondly, what does your organisation contribute to the community? The answers to those questions should give you a greater sense of self-worth and a greater sense of achievement in whatever it is that you're doing. Many years ago, when I was a small boy in the days of the Apollo space program, somebody asked the guy who was sweeping the floor, "What do you do?" And his answer was, "I helped to put a man on the moon." And that's important because what he's recognizing there is whatever you do, if you're involved, you're helping to achieve that end result. So obviously, I'm guessing most of you aren't helping to put a man on the moon, but if you're involved in voluntary work, or you're involved in a tenants residents association, or wherever you work, you play a small part in a much bigger activity. And you need to understand what that bigger activity is. It should give you a much better sense of self-worth and of achievement, that you're not just doing your little bit, you're part of a bigger thing having a much bigger positive impact in the community. Secondly though, if you want to progress in that work, then you have to understand what's going on around you, so it's important for that too. So don't forget those two questions. What do you contribute to your organisation, and what does your organisation contribute to the community at large? Eyes and ears. Now this is a concept that came out many years ago, and essentially it goes like this. If you work in a community in whatever role, you should not be going into that community just focused on your work, on your role. So for example, if I am a health worker and I go into a community to do health work, I should not just be looking at health problems. Now that doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything is your responsibility. What it means is that if you notice things, if you see things that need addressing or dealing with or reporting, then you don't ignore them. And that's important because if you think about all the different people that go into communities, whether they work for the council or the police or in education or healthcare or whatever, all the information that they must pick up about that community and how useful that is to different agencies, if they ignore it, it's wasted. It's a wasted resource, it's wasted information. Now that doesn't mean if you see something, all of a sudden it's your problem. It just means tell someone, pass it on. If you see something, and if it's nothing to do with you, but you think that's important, or you think that's an issue that needs addressing, let somebody know. Everyone who goes into the community should be the eyes and ears of that community, sharing information and working together. This is even more important once you get into the realms of things like safeguarding, which is about protecting vulnerable adults and children. Then there are actual procedures and protocols for that which you have to follow. But even on a much smaller scale, if you see something's broken or vandalism or something needs fixing or there's a policing issue that needs to be addressed or whatever it is, if you pick up this information just from your time in the community, you shouldn't waste it. You should share it with the people who need to know. What skills do you need? It's very often when I talk to people who work in communities or in voluntary organisations, when I ask them, how did you get this role, for them to say to me, well, nobody else would do it. And I think that's a shame that we sometimes downplay how good we are, because I come across people all the time who work for nothing. They work for voluntary organisations or campaigns or projects or TRAs or committees, and they display a wide variety of skills that are really valuable in the workplace and would be paid quite a decent salary, you know. So it's a useful exercise, I think, for your own self-esteem, but also for your own development, to ask yourself, what skills do I need to be good at this role? Write them down, okay? Now, maybe you've already got them, maybe you haven't got them, and there are always things we haven't got. There are always what we call skills gaps that we've all got. Or maybe you've got them and you just want to develop them a bit further. They're not where you think they should be. Whatever it is, have a think. Write down what you think the skills are you need to develop. Once you've got that, the good news is we've done other videos on a lot of the things that we're talking about. So we've done videos on working with other people, we've done videos on communication skills, we've done videos on problem solving. So check out our videos, but that's just a starting point. Look at, do you need to spend time with people who are good at those skills? You've got a mentor you could find. Is there a course or some training you could go on? If you're in the Stockport area, talk to me about courses, that's my job. But have a think about that. But at the same time, don't discount the things you're already doing. I meet people all the time working in voluntary roles who show great communication skills, great negotiation skills, great leadership, great team working skills, great problem solving, all sorts of wide variety of skills. And these are really valuable assets that shouldn't be ignored. So don't. The ladder of involvement. Now, this is a concept that can look a bit complicated when you first see it, but relax. All I want you to really understand here is not the details, but the underlying basic principle, and it goes like this. The ladder of involvement is an illustration of what really you should be aiming for when you work with a community group, or in a community, let's say. Let's say you're working with a group of people to try and get something off the ground, to try and help that community. Then you start at the bottom of the ladder. And what the ladder of involvement says is that at the bottom of the ladder, you will be doing most of the work because you're the person with the expertise, you're the person with the resources. So you're going to be helping the community, but you're really going to be doing most of the work to begin with. But as you work your way up the ladder, what we're aiming for at the top is that the community take over that activity and you're doing very little, if anything. You are able to back away and leave it with the community. Now that's important for a number of reasons. If we don't do that, what happens is we're doing all the work all the time, which limits our ability to work with other groups. It also means that that community never has complete ownership of that work or of that project. And that's important because ownership is how we put a value to something. If someone comes in and does something for somebody else, that's good, but it's never as good as if someone does it for themselves, if they own it. If people own something, if people say that's my work, that's my project, that's my community, they will value it much more and they'll fight harder to protect it. They'll take much more interest in it and they'll be much more connected and committed to it. Ownership is a really important aspect of that. But the underlying principle of the ladder is really about a term called empowerment. You may have heard this. Empowerment just means you're giving the other person the tools, the skills, the resources they need to do that work for themselves. And that's what we try and do in communities or in voluntary situations. We're not just trying to do things for people, we're trying to empower them, to strengthen those people so they can do it on their own and ultimately they won't need us. And then we can go off and help somebody else. And that increases our capacity to do more and on the whole strengthens a much bigger breadth of the community than we can if we're having to do everything for ourselves. So the ladder of involvement is an important principle. Don't get caught up in the details. As long as you understand those key things about ownership and empowerment, you've kind of got it. Boundaries and limitations. So far we've been talking about your role, and we've talked about in voluntary organisations about if you go into communities, you're the eyes and ears of that community and you're going to contribute to other people's work. And we've talked about empowering other people in the community so that they've got more skills and resources and confidence to get on things with themselves and how you're going to give them ownership of what you're doing so that they're more committed to it. And we've talked about what you can do, but it's also important that you understand, whatever your role is, what you cannot do as well. This is the boundaries. It's like the edge of your role, the limitations. And obviously they will vary from role to role, but in very general terms we talk about them under 3 categories. And the first one is what we call practical. Practical is essentially what you can do in the time you've got with the tools and resources available to you. So if you've only got so many hours in the day and you can only commit so much time out of that day, and you're only one person, and you've got to be realistic about what you can and can't do. If you're not, it's very easy, especially in a voluntary organisation, to get overwhelmed because there's lots of good work to be done and there's usually not enough people to do it. And if you're a nice person who's already got involved and you've shown commitment, it's very easy for people to say, well, could you do this as well? And could you do that as well? And before you know it, you'll be swamped. So for your own health and well-being and your work-life balance, you have to be clear from the outset what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Okay, for your own mental well-being and also for your physical well-being. There's no point working yourself to death. You contribute, but it's one part of your life, not your whole life. That's the way it should be. That's a healthy kind of mindset when you're looking at this. So then you've got to work out what is your practical limitations. That's about you personally. The next category is procedural. Now, procedural just means the rules the organisation has created for them to work smoothly and to keep you safe. Every organisation has its own rules or procedures, and it's important that you understand them and that you follow them. You don't necessarily have to agree with them, but if you follow them, you should be in the clear. If you decide to step outside of those procedures, if you say, well, I know it says I should do this, but I don't agree with that, I'm going to do something different, well, then you're taking a risk, because if that then goes wrong, the whole weight of that situation falls on your shoulders, because people will say, look at everything that went wrong. Did you follow the rules? And if you can't say yes, if you say, no, I didn't, then you're responsible in some level. And that's not a good place to be. So my advice to you is follow the rules and procedures. Even if you're not happy with them, they're there for a reason. Often they're more often there to protect you and protect the greater organisation and their reputation. So they're worth understanding before you get started. The last category is legal. It's the law. It's the law of the land. And obviously you have to follow that. And that includes things like health and safety legislation and safeguarding legislation, etc. So the law of land has certain rules and we all have to follow them. So it's worth being aware if there is any legality or any law that applies to what you're trying to do and what the limitations and boundaries are around that. So again, find out what those boundaries and limitations are about your practical, what you're willing to do or capable of doing, about the procedural, what the organisation's rules are, and about the legal aspect. Legally, under law, what are the things that you can do and what are the things that you've got to be careful that you don't do. So there you have it. We've looked at what you contribute, what your organisations contribute, the eyes and ears principle, the ladder of involvement, what skills are involved in community participation, and we've looked at your boundaries and limitations, what you can and can't do. And you may say to yourself, why do I need to know all this if I'm just going to be doing this little role over here? I think it's important for you to understand how your little role fits in to the bigger picture, and hopefully that gives you a greater sense of value to what you do. There are no little roles. Whatever you're doing, it's an important and valuable part of that organisation. So understand that and be proud of that. So I hope that was interesting to you. Obviously, we've raced through that at a pace to keep the video nice and short. There's a lot more to this, which you can go and check out for yourselves. If you are in a voluntary organisation or contributing to a community, then good on you. We need more people like you. I love working with volunteers because they are generally brilliant people. So I hope you found that interesting and I hope you found that useful. Until next time I see you, stay safe and goodbye.